Tales of a Trans Theater Band Kid because I think that I had a pretty unique experience in high school and as a young adult where not only was I a theater kid, but I was also a band kid. And let me tell you, those things are both very intense. I was even a debate kid at one point, and yeah, I mean, it's really important developmentally because of how much of kind of a cult theater at least is, because of how much time you spend with these people. So I'm going to just tell a few stories, and maybe we'll get into more as we go. But please join me on this season of Tales of a Trans Band Kid and Theater Kid. I'm going to have to think of a good name. So being trans in theater has always been pretty difficult because when I was younger, I noticed I was trans and I thought I was going to do something about it, but I was in theater at the time and it was affecting my ability to get cast in any roles that I wanted because they would be like, well, look, you don't walk right, you walk too feminine, you sound too feminine. This is what they told me, a young closeted trans woman who was trying to come to terms with their own identity, but they were giving me lessons, they were instructing me on how to be a man. And I distinctly remember one year I was the king of the fairies. I was Oberon in Midsummer Night's Dream, and my theater teacher dressed me up as David Bowie from The Labyrinth. So I want you to picture this. I'm in a full Tina Turner wig. I'll put the picture on screen. I'm in a full Tina Turner wig. I'm in like a pirate shirt with like a magician's robe and leather pants. And she had the audacity, oh, and not to mention makeup, but she had the audacity to tell me that I was too gay for the king of the fairies. So this is what I mean when I say there's a lot to be said about being trans in theater. And I'm not going to try to go into all of it now, but I'm just going to tell a few other funny stories. I actually went semi-viral on TikTok for telling the story of the time that I asked my theater teacher, hey, we were going on a field trip, and I was like, hey, can I room with my friend who was a girl, and I was closer with the girls in theater on average anyway, and she freaked out at me. She's like, no, boys room with boys, girls room with girls. And she ended up sticking me in a room with my boyfriend at the time. So not only did this problem not need to be had because she very much knew I wasn't attracted to girls, she put me in a room with my boyfriend anyway, despite the fact that she was trying to prevent this kind of nonsense. And all I'm going to say is shit happens. But that is pretty unique to the trans experience, I'd say, because gender is such a rule, that even if you're trying to come out as gender nonconforming, gay, trans, I wasn't completely out as trans yet when I was in theater. Maybe she would have been different about it. But I do remember distinctly one time I was doing an audition, and she told me, you need to change out of that dress. I can't take you seriously when you're wearing that dress. And it was the first day I had worn a bra to school, and I had been really self-conscious about my nipple development, and people made fun of me because my nipples protruded out of my chest. So I wore a bra, and I never wore another bra to school because I felt like I was a joke. I mean, what people don't realize is that trans women feel like clowns, especially when they're first getting used to it, because it's so weird for everyone around them. How weird do you think it feels for them, My theater teacher, I remember, I did have a lot of good memories of theater, but I don't feel bad calling these behaviors out now because in retrospect, it was kind of damaging. But if it makes her feel any better, all of my theater teachers have been like this, which let me just real quick say, I think beckons the question, why do we think that is? I think that theater is a very archaic art. You'd think, well, oh, but gay people, all sorts of leftist people, all these progressive people love theater. Yeah, but theater isn't famous for its improvisation. Theater isn't famous for its spontaneity. It's famous for doing the same play for years over and over. Like, I'm sorry, but how many years ago were most of these musicals written? Everyone's like, but what about Wicked? It's like, yeah, Wicked was amazing, but it was written over a decade ago, And I think it's important to say that the last new exciting musical was Hamilton. And it was amazing and it was sensational. And that was because it deviated so much from the musical theater formula. But anyway, I'm not going to go into a whole deep dive. I want this to be a series. I'll never forget, my theater teacher told me we were doing a production of Steel Magnolias, and she encouraged me to audition. She's like, yeah, audition. You can audition in drag, and if you're a fit, and I was really flattered. I was like, thank you for trying to make space for me, because if you don't know about the play Steel Magnolias, it's only 6 parts, and they're all women. And so especially considering I was a senior that year. It was one less play that I would even have a chance to do. So it was nice of her to even let me audition. But I remember every single note I got in that audition, every single one was, okay, all of this is fine, but sound less like a man. Don't be a man, you know? And I was a 16, 17-year-old kid, and I had just come to terms with my identity, and it was really hard, you know? And I feel like I was sucker punched almost, because it was like, okay, audition. I'm going to be accommodating, you know, for you, this queer person. Because I was, just the year before, I had been cast as the gay guy in Legally Blonde. You know what I mean? I wasn't cast as any of these main roles. I got passed up for Freshman in Braces because she could take them more seriously as men than me. So I had to play the gay or the sexually androgynous villain in every single play. But I was like, dang, she's going to let me audition for this female role. But all I heard was, you sound like a man, your voice. And look, I get it. I do have a deep voice, and I had a much deeper voice then, and I get that that's an issue for like the illusion, but can we just like normalize that not everyone is the same? Can we normalize that not everybody has to fit into these little boxes? We live in all these little boxes, in tinier little boxes. It's so weird. I was always doing the costumes because, you know, it was one of my outlets, and I always remember how weird it was being the gay one, because I was allowed in both dressing rooms because I was the makeup designer, and I and none of the boys obviously knew how to do their makeup, so I had to do all the boys' makeup while they squirm and joke around and kick shoes at me, you know. And but I was treated almost like an other because I I didn't get to act in most of the plays, you know. I wanted to, but I had a talent for the costume design, and my teacher was always really encouraging about that. You know, I even entered a contest that I think I did really well in, but I got disqualified for a technicality. I'll go into that another day. But as a young theater kid, I just remember feeling all this pressure to build my reputation and like build my resume. And every time I didn't get the role I wanted, I was devastated. And I remember once I auditioned for Bye Bye Birdie, and I was only being considered for the role of Conrad Birdie, of all things. Which, if you don't know the show, Bye Bye Birdie is about basically Elvis. Like, Conrad Birdie is an Elvis type, and he likes to slam it in Janet, if you know what I mean. So obviously, I'm pelvic thrusting in my audition, and it just wasn't that convincing, and I didn't get it, and I was pretty disappointed in myself. And as a constellation prize, they were like, well, you can teach all these girls harmony. And it's like, oh, good. But I get it. You know, the only role I truly feel got to encapsulate. I got 2 roles in the course of my time in theater that I truly was proud of. No, 3. I was proud of Oberon, even if I was too gay. But it was Lord Farquaad in Shrek. I'll include pictures. And the cat in Honk. I really do think I played into that sexually androgynous villain archetype very well. Because, you know, we could talk about this someday too. The roots of transphobia and queerphobia in horror, and villains in general are coded queer. Like, let's talk about Disney villains. Ursula was modeled after a drag queen divine. Like, villains are very queer. They're very flamboyant. Like, let's talk about the villain in Pocahontas. Ooh. But yeah, I I had a really good time as a kid in theater. It was so important for me because when I first came out was when I first went back to theater. When I was a little kid, I did theater, but when I went into middle school, I started getting bullied for it, so I stopped. And that was when I retreated into band, and I'll tell more stories about that someday too. But I just remember when I finally started doing theater again was right after I had come out as gay, and I had basically had to start over from scratch with a new group of friends because my old group of friends was my girlfriend's group of friends, and I broke up with her on Christmas telling her I was gay. But in my defense, she asked. She could tell she could tell something was wrong, and she's like, "Come on, tell me what's wrong." And I was like, "I don't want to tell you." And because it was almost Christmas, but I told her, and she was super cool about it, but I did have to start over new. I had to start over from scratch with new friends, and I'll always be friends with those people who reached out to me and found me at my lowest. And a lot of those people were in theater. It's a community. It's a toxic community. It's an archaic community. It's a community that honestly tortures kids, and some teachers are basically high school mean girls. But overall, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, and I'm so sad that so few people actually get to experience it because of budget cuts. I was lucky enough to be in an area where the theater department had a lot of donors and a fair amount of money, and they had just gotten a brand new theater, and we had a costume room and budgets for our shows, and that's not a privilege that everyone has. But so I would hate for this video to seem like I'm just talking shit on theater, when in reality I think it is one of the most beautiful things. But I just think it should be willing to change. I mean, theater has not had a trans character until very recently, and I would like to point out that a gender nonconforming character is not the same as a trans person, because everybody treats trans people already as gender aliens. So if you're introducing this character, it's like, but they're a gender alien. It's like, well, that's great, but do you have a legitimate trans character? I would love to see that. The Pasadena Playhouse had a wonderful production of Little Shop of Horrors that featured a trans woman as Audrey and a bunch of other really talented performers. I'll leave a link down below. Actually, I don't know if I should, because I don't think bootlegs are supposed to exist on YouTube. Anyway, it's amazing, and it was so exciting for me to see that a trans woman was able to play the lead, but it didn't go to Broadway, and I want Broadway to change, because if there's any time for Broadway to change, wouldn't it be after this pandemic? I mean, this pandemic really did hit a lot of industries really bad, and some worse than others. Let's talk about it. Broadway got hit pretty hard, and if Broadway is less profitable than ever, they're going to take less risks than ever. So you know what's going to happen to theater? It's going to die like an old wet fart. I hate to say it, everyone. If you go and you see Broadway shows, you are white. There are definitely exceptions to that rule, but there's a classist element, okay? Maybe you're not white. You are rich, because you have to be rich in order to be into Broadway. You have to be rich in order to make it on Broadway. You have to be rich in order to get into the programs and the schools that make it so that you can make it on Broadway. You have to live in New York, which, by the way, telling a young person, just move to New York, make your dreams come true, that's a nightmare, especially in a pandemic. Anyway, I'm rambling. I hope you enjoyed the first segment of Tales of a Trans Theater Kid. Hopefully I'll talk about band next time. Let me know if you like this kind of video. I have a lot of stories. Have a good one.